let's not lose the focus in terms of you knew what you were doing wasn't right. And you know, Jack mentioned he worked in Bethpage, again, right here on Long Island for a couple of years. And you know, we've talked about how, as a school psychologist, sometimes we know we're not doing the right thing, but we keep doing it. And there was a real transformative moment, a real pivotal moment for you, Jack. You know, when you're working at Bethpage, talk just a little bit about that, because I think it's really important for all of us to kind of stop and reflect a little bit on our practice in the same way that Jack is going to talk about.
Yeah, so for me, I didn't do anything for years after that. But I had the vision that something was wrong. And when you're testing and you get that feeling, like, why am I asking this question of this kid who grew up in poverty? And I'm asking this kid to define or describe how two words are similar or not, and they're, you know, who knows if they have been exposed enough to that. You need to stick with that. You need to let it guide you. Let it guide your thinking. So that happened to me when I was 25 in 1975. And it wasn't until 81 when it really struck me with the case in the Havasupai. And then in 82, I wrote my first paper. In 85, I wrote my first test. So it took me a while to actually do something about it, but I've been doing a lot since then. But I think we too often take for granted that when someone tells us you can use this test for this purpose, we don't question it enough. You know, like John said, I've given a lot of presentations. People don't ask me, and I've seen people not ask the question, where's the validity for this, right? So someone's going to tell you, you know, you can interpret these 3 tests in these different ways. But do you ever ask if there's validity evidence to support that interpretation? I'll give you an example. I learned this a long time ago. Remember how people used to interpret picture arrangement as having something to do with social understanding, right? You know? I mean, I was taught that. Well, there was articles that, and I did some research on that, great article in Psych Assessment, had no relationship to understanding social context. Now, it was logical, it was rational, it was reasonable, just happened to be wrong. You know? Seriously. You have to not only look critically, you have to ask the critical questions. They're not hostile questions if you ask somebody, I love your idea, could you please direct me to the research, the science that supports this, because I'm going to change a kid's life by what I say. And I don't want to do that unless I'm really confident, because when I get on the witness stand as an expert witness, I don't want to say, well, I used this book that told me I can interpret it this way, even though there's no science to support that interpretation. Right? It all fits together. It needs to be scientifically based. It's too important what we do, but you got to trust your gut, and you got to follow that.
Let's stop and think about that, because even before you got into your research as a school psychologist in Bethpage, you knew something was wrong. And that last line that you just used of trusting yourself, when you know better, you got to do better. And you got to act on that. And I think that that's a really important message for us as school psychologists to hear. Oftentimes we know something's wrong, or we know we're not doing the right thing by the kids, and yet it's the way things have always been done. It's the way we were taught. We were told that it has to be this way. And this is really the challenge for us as school psychologists, is when we know better, we got to do better. We're going to add to that in just a moment. But let's jump forward just for a little bit. So as you've heard, I mean, he kind of throws out, yeah, I did this work with Alan Kaufman, and I wrote these subtests for the KEBC. But kind of downplays that a little bit, like it's no big deal. But that was a huge research that you did and test development there as a graduate student at Georgia. But you graduate from Georgia. You've already talked about going out to Arizona and working with Native American population, but eventually you end up at Ohio State. And you do some really important work there, working in some impoverished areas that really changed the direction even more of your career in an equity-based type of practice. Talk a little bit about that piece.
Yeah, and I want to link that to the most recent because the two really go together, if that's okay. So I said to you that science is important, right? The beauty of being a test author is you have tons of data from all your standardization samples. So what I did is I always made sure that I could access those data and publish them. So I've published on all my tests race and ethnic and gender differences. And it's great. Like when I did my gender differences on my nonverbal test, we had 65,000 people in the sample. Yeah, K to 12. That answers the question. There are no gender differences on these progressive matrices that I had, right? With the cognitive assessment system, really important because that's the thing that we do the most, try to understand cognitive variability to really help students, but it has to be equitable. And I did the research. My colleague, J.P. Dess, said, no, Jack, you should not do that. I said, JP, I have to. I have to know if it's equitable or not. And I did it. And I did it in a lot of different studies. We just studied we published in a lot of different places. We showed that, in fact, measuring basic psychological processes, as long as you, first of all, if you have a theory, instead of, that's unique in itself. To build a test on a theory of intelligence, that was the first time that was ever done. But we have to know if it's equitable. We also have to know if it works for SLD, which it does, for ADHD, which it does, and on and on. But I think the real clincher for me is more recently, because I have been saying for a long time that the problem with all the tests that we're told are gold standards is that they demand knowledge. And it's reasonable for you to say, well, do you have any evidence that that's true? And I would say, well, my cognitive assessment system shows that. But you could say, but that's a different methodology. And I would say, well, but I did create a verbal, a nonverbal, and a quantitative test with two of my amazing co-authors, which is the traditional model. And we just published them a month ago. And in 3 separate studies involving about 10,000 students, K to 12, we found no race differences, no ethnic differences, no gender differences, no parental ed differences on each of those 3 tests on 3 separate samples. I think that's about as strong evidence as you can get that if you take the knowledge out of the measurement of intelligence, even if it's the old school general intelligence model, you get equity. And if you really want to understand the student, you use path theory and you still get equity. Equity is the key. We have to do better for the kids that we evaluate.
So forgive me, and don't take this wrong, but why is that important? I mean, you've talked about the history of the tests that we give, and if anyone has seen any of Jack's presentations, he talks about many of the tests and the origins of those. Why is equity so important, Jack?
To me personally, you're asking.
Well, yes, personally, but professionally as well.
Well, as a professional, we have to do right by our students. That's our professional obligation. NYASP standards, APA standards talk about being change agents, being advocates for kids, doing the right thing for the kids.
Talk a little bit about the history of the test that we give and how this really developed in terms of your equity lens.
Well, look, if you go back and look at the history, it's an ugly history. I was so proud that APA put out an apology. I mean, was it perfect? Probably not. Could it have done more? Probably. We can always go in those directions. But they finally recognized that we've done a disservice, and we've fueled white supremacy. And we've accepted for too long that the tests were right. We should have, the research on race and ethnic differences was about the tests, not about the people. But we attributed that to the people. I think, especially in the early 1900s, the racism was just rampant everywhere.
And so as we move into this equity lens now you could talk, from that personal perspective, professional perspective.
I mean, think about it. For me, my guidance counselor told me I wasn't smart enough. The CW Post lady told me I wasn't smart enough. I couldn't get into the doctoral program because I wasn't smart enough. Pissed me off. Look, I remember thinking, I'll show you, lady.
You didn't know we're in a little therapy session up here. Albert Ellis used to do this.
John, you're exposing me here, buddy. Exposing me here.
All right, I'll let you off the hook a little bit. I think, as I think about it, quite honestly, Jack, I think about understanding the science. So Jack talked before about understanding what we're doing. If it doesn't feel right, do better. Now we're kind of adding in understanding the science behind what we're doing.
I want to add something.
Please go ahead.
And Celeste Malone contributed to this. So John and Peter created a Critical Conversations, and I heard Celeste say that social justice required self-reflection. And I really like that. And I've kind of embellished it and added, I think socially just intelligence testing requires self-reflection, self-correction in relation to the science. And that's where our focus should be now. Looking forward, we need to move beyond 100-year-old technology. Do you really want a something 6th edition? I mean, just think about that for a second. Someone says, oh, I got the 5th edition, the new one. Like, new? I mean, just think about that. Should we really be doing that as learned professionals who impact the lives of kids? I don't think so.
So we are going to be treated to Jack on guitar to show a little bit of his musical abilities.
I heard a song in a movie recently, and I'm just going to play a little bit of it. It goes like this. Maybe it's time to let the old ways die. Maybe it's time to let the old ways die. Takes a lot to change, and it takes a lot to try. Maybe it's time to let the old ways die. Here we go.
A star is born. No pun intended, I apologize. So the message, is the socially just assessment of intelligence really requires that self-reflection, kind of asking ourselves, what are we doing? And self-correction. How can we do it better in the face of the science, understanding the science behind what we're actually doing? Is that a key message for you, Jack?
Yes, and trust yourself, trust your own gut when you're doing something and it doesn't feel right. And ask the critical questions of anyone and everyone. Can you please provide us the research evidence to support what you're suggesting we do when we interpret a test score about a person? Because you make a huge difference in people's lives. Not everyone will say, I'll show you, lady, right? Some people will say, I must not be smart. And the first kid I ever tested with cognitive assessment system, first kid, he had a real problem. He was basically inattentive type of ADHD. I did what we often don't do. I sat down with him, even before I talked to his parents. I said, Frankie, I found out that you're really good at kind of figuring out how to solve problems and do things. That's awesome. And that you're really good about seeing how things fit together, simultaneous processing and first one being planning. And you're really good at following a sequence, successive processing, temporal lobe. And I said, but it's really hard for you to pay attention. And he said to me, yeah, that's right, I just can't concentrate. I said, wow. And I talked to him for a little while more, and then he said to me, oh, you're telling me I'm not stupid. Well, Frankie had an older sister with Down syndrome, and he understood that not everyone's really smart. His posture changed when I talked to him. He felt differently about himself. We need to do that with all the kids we test, but we need to be able to explain it to them in ordinary terms, which you can't do very easily unless you use the right instruments. But here's the thing. I found out that Frankie now is an adult. He has his own kids. And he used his strengths to become a good graphic designer, and he has a job at in a reputable, good company. And what would it have been like if he thought he was just not smart? What would it have been like if I never told him, you are smart? What would have happened to him? Not everybody is maybe tough enough like me. I got tough from being in the music business. If you're not tough, you get run over, right? But some people aren't. They might just believe it. And then that does a disservice to them. So just keep in mind that impact we have on people.
Such a critical message. So Jack, you may think that we're finished, but we're not.
Do I have to play another song?
Jack doesn't know this, but as part of this evening, wanted to kind of honor him in a couple of different ways. Now, we talked a little bit about family a little bit earlier tonight, but what you should know, and this is an area that Jack and I, truly are blessed, and we see eye to eye on this, that no matter how many accolades we get or positions of honor that we hold or awards that we're given, the title Dad is the best.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to honor Jack tonight. And I asked your family to share some reflections on you. I asked them to share, and I heard from all of your kids. From Andrea, Antonia, and from Jack Jr.
Oh.
And so Jack Jr., who lives out in California, very successful businessman, CEO of his own company, said to me, navigating through my career and then starting the company, you have always been a present, selfless, and loving parent that coached me through times of struggle. When I was feeling unhappy during parts of my career, you encouraged me to keep trying, and that growth mindset stuck with me permanently. Wow. Andrea said, those big moments in your life where there are so many things going on, lots of people and commotion, but there are quiet, powerful moments somewhere in the middle? Those are the moments with my dad I remember the most. Wow. A time just to break away and reflect on the moments in front of us. There are so many, but a few I remember the most, like the time during breakfast, just the two of us on my wedding day. And of course, when you drove her to the hospital when her water broke. Neither one of them were expecting that. And I don't think either of us thought that would ever happen. But those pivotal moments are times I cherish and am grateful that you were there for me. And Andrea's husband, Scott, recalled a time of struggle in his own career and how in a conversation with you, Jack, your words just seemed to help Scott to truly believe in himself. And their daughter, Samantha, Jack's granddaughter, very, very cute. You can see Samantha in the bottom right corner there. She shared some of her most treasured moments are waking up early to watch the sunrise with you and take selfies. Wow. And I do want to acknowledge Antonia, who helped set all of this up, by the way. Antonia said to me, "It's hard to put into words how much my relationship with my dad means to me and how much he's impacted me. It's also difficult to think of specific pivotal moments with my dad in my life because he's been there all my life and for all the important moments. From the time I was a child to my young adult years as a new professional and adult years as a wife and step-parent, he's always been there every step of the way through good times and bad. That's just the kind of man and father he is, a loving, constant supporter, friend, and listening ear." However, Antonia, you did share that memory of your wedding day, walking down the aisle. And as we could see, Antonia, and I think I could see it in your eyes in that photo there, how she was feeling just a bit nervous, a bit anxious, and was overcome by emotion by seeing all of her friends and family and her groom waiting for her at the altar. And ever the psychologist, Jack said to her, "Remember your yoga breathing, hon." And made a little joke to her, just to kind of help her feel a little bit more comfortable. But it was that perfect comforting moment that brought Antonia back down. And her husband, Scott, also shared. He was a little nervous asking you to marry your daughter.
As he should be.
Absolutely. In fact, for people who may have seen the movie Meet the Parents, and he was a little worried that he was going to have to go through a lie detector test. And he was awfully happy that Jack didn't have a cat to lose.
So you want to marry my daughter?
He was a little, he was going to be the Ben Stiller to De Niro's character over here. But no, in all seriousness, Scott just reflected upon that moment, of how you welcomed him into the family and made him feel like a son, and he was good enough to marry your daughter. And I want to close with just kind of one last slide from Mom. So Jack's mom is here on Long Island still, alive, very strong, independent woman living out on the east end of Long Island. And I spoke to Mama Naglieri. I've been lucky enough to develop a relationship with Jack's mom. And she shared lots of stories, Jack, some that I won't share here. We'll talk about some of those later on. But there were very telling stories about you. And as we just saw, Jack is an accomplished musician. Jack taught lessons as a teenager. And she shared, one story about, I guess, Jack, at different times you had different chores you had to do around the house. Your dad would give you different chores. And apparently one of them was to cut the lawn. And apparently Jack did not like to cut the lawn. In fact, he often grumbled about cutting that damn lawn all the time. And then what he discovered was one of the young men that he taught guitar lessons to was struggling a little bit financially. And so they made this little deal. If you cut the lawn, I'll continue to teach you guitar lessons.
See, that's planning in action right there.
That was
On
planning
the road,
in action
baby.
right there. However, Jack's father didn't know Jack had this little arrangement until one day, Jack's father comes home and sees Brian cutting the lawn. Comes in and says, "Jack, tell me a little bit about what's going on out there."
Not exactly. Linda's saying, we'll go, no, Dad didn't say that.
Jack calmly said to him, "I made him an offer he couldn't refuse." Jack, I think that was your first test, the Tom Sawyer test of intelligence, the
really?
Italian version of it all. But no, we are also honored to have one of Jack's sisters here, Linda. If you wanted to share real briefly any reflection or just kind of congratulate Jack at this point in time.
I'll just say I was Jack's first guinea pig, so he learned how to test.
So one of the things that I have been honored and blessed to be able to do with my wife, Jack's wife, Kathleen, is sail with Jack. That is his passion now in that. And so being a good Irishman, I'd like to close this evening with a little Irish blessing, Jack.
Oh.
We call him Captain Jack now as opposed to Dr. Jack.
No, it's Captain Legend, Dr. Jack.
Oh, now it's going to have to be Captain Legend. Remember that on the boat. Kathleen will never call you Captain Legend, I'm sorry. But Jack, we all want to wish you. May the seas lie smooth before you. May a gentle breeze forever fill your sails. May sunshine warm your face and kindness warm your soul. Until we meet again, may God bless you and keep you safe.
Thank you, buddy.
The legendary Dr. Jack Naglieri. We do want to present Dr. Jack Naglieri with the Legend in School Psychology 2022 Award.
Wow. That's awesome. I didn't expect that. Thank you so much. Thanks so very much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time being here today, every single one of you. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you all.